Hello, welcome to another episode of Namtaro Talks. I'll be honest, I have topics and ideas that I list out in a separate document. Some are more fleshed out with more sub-bullet points than others. Some not so much. It's literally just that one bullet point. And you've already known, there are heavy topics and lighter topics. There are long episodes, short episodes. Some are more quote-unquote playful, some are more serious. I know the previous episode was a bit heavy and serious. And I'll be honest, this episode, you already know by the title, it is not very lighthearted. I'm not saying that it's completely positive or negative, but it's still, still believe it's worth talking about. And this episode is about the impact of a human life. I'll start off by saying that I am pretty fortunate in my life that I have not had many quote-unquote losses thus far. I mean, of course, there are people who are close to me, who are important figures to me that have died. However, nothing has been very quote-unquote heavy yet. And I say yet because I know that I will have quote-unquote losses in the future and they will hit heavy. I think the heaviness comes from how close you were with that person or how long you've known that person, how many memories you have with that person, how much you interacted with that person. And the episode, of course, will talk about more personal people in my life, but I will also talk about other losses of other people I've seen. Okay, the best way to say is the losses of other people in my life. It may not directly be related to me, but I can see how it affected or impacted them. I will also briefly tie into the impact of a human life, whether it be not really political figures, but public figures or historical figures. Honestly, it is such a broad topic. You can take it any way, really. And of course, to protect confidentiality, I would not disclose names. Personally, I believe the stories told and my takes and perspectives on these people's lives are more important than that person's identity itself. I will start by talking about the loss of one of my past professors. Some losses, you ruminate about it for several days or for several weeks. This one is still a bit recent, but I was able to take a step back and reflect upon not just what she meant to me, but what she meant for the community and her field in general. Because this was the professor who interviewed me for me to get into my graduate program. She was the professor who helped me work on my evidence-based paper thesis. I had many meetings with her. She also taught several of my classes. She's not the professor I am the closest to, but she's been there and I've seen me through my professional steps through the academic program. My impression of her was that she had it together. She was very joyful, knowledgeable, assertive. The funny thing is, I thought she was an extroverted type A, but she told me she's really introverted type B. But I would have never guessed based on her friendliness, affability, positivity, but also compassion and understanding. And I'm not the only one who shared these sentiments. Like all my classmates did, all of the students in the program above me and below me, many of the alumni, many of the fellow faculty members. She saw us as her quote-unquote doctorate children. Not to mention she had 3 children of her own. I was friends with her on social media. She's usually posting about how proud she were of those children and of the various accomplishments that they achieved. Yeah, those 3 kids are likely the most affected at this loss. I guess sometimes I might disclose the cause of death, but in this case, not as much. I just let you know that it was a chronic, or at one point we thought it was gonna get better, but it came back with a vengeance and it got worse. And it is very unfair because she was still, in my eyes, I thought she was a bit still young, you know? She still had a whole bunch of life ahead of her, a whole bunch of things to do, a whole bunch of milestones to see her kids go through. But she affected so many people, dozens if not hundreds of people in the field, in the community. There was another professor, this professor who recently died. She became the department head. However, her predecessor made a tribute post about her. And of course, the predecessor is a bit older. But I guess one thing that kind of surprised me was that that predecessor was this current professor's professor at one point, like actual teacher who taught a certain subject. I was like, wow, they go that way back and they have the same authoritative role, and that takes a lot of responsibility and a representative of the graduate program. Of course, it's not only about what she was like or what she taught or how good she was in her field, but it's also the example, the role model she served. Like, this is how you should conduct yourself. This is how you deal with adversity. This is how you assert your knowledge and expertise in this field. I know there's many other people who knew her much more and much longer and have way more to say about her. But needless to say, this professor, she has a place in my life, or at least one point in my journey. I don't mean to pivot hard, but I want to talk about my grandpa. I believe I mentioned him in a few previous episodes. Of course, he had a rough upbringing, but he was principled and disciplined and believed in education. And as he went into those professions, he instilled those values onto my aunts and uncles and my mom, who then instilled it upon me, my brother, and my cousins. Yeah, you can kind of infer from my race that a war has been a part of our family's history, and he was definitely affected by the war. But I've known him, well, he lived a bit farther away, so it was not easy to visit him super consistently. But the times when I did visit him, it was at different phases at my life. Of course, as a little kid, as a toddler, in elementary school, middle school, high school. I think once during undergrad, and another time after that. And he even met my fiance and now wife briefly. That was my last visit with him. And of course, the people I talk about, they aren't perfect. Everyone has their own flaws. Everyone has their own struggles and conflicts. And that goes for the same for my grandpa. He did the best he could with what he had. And he did serve an impact. He did serve memories. He took us to the beach. He took us to historical sites and to museums, to the cultural shopping center, to the fish market. But it's not about just where he took us. It's also about what he did with us. And I always tell the story about the summer where he made my brother and I sit down and write about what we did that day in our native language. And he would grade those paragraphs. But he definitely influenced the culture, the language, the heritage. So over time I tried to find other ways to bond with him, whether it be certain aspects of history or certain aspects of music, I don't know. And he loved life. He enjoyed taking the subway. He enjoyed walking to the local mall and getting coffee at I think it was at McDonald's. And sometimes it's those little anecdotes and memories that stick out. I remember we were on a family trip and he was with us and we were driving, and then he saw a jackfruit tree and he's like, "Hey, look, it's a jackfruit, we gotta stop by." So we stopped by the house with the jackfruit tree and asked if we can buy the jackfruit from them, which they sold to us, and then we cut open and ate it, all just because of him. Well, it was pretty good jackfruit though. But he's not just like the jackfruit education man. We see him with reverence and respect. He was the paternal authority figure in the family. And with his passing, because of where he was located, I could not attend his funeral. Also, he wanted to expedite the process and wanted to be only a close family only. So mainly my mom and my aunts and uncles went. And I only knew him through the context of family. You know, I'm sure he had many friends and social circles I did not know about. But with the professor, it was based on a community and the people in the field. With my grandpa, it was more for family, the impact of everyone in the family. And the same goes with several other aunts and uncles. I had an aunt in Vietnam who was very kind, and I remember that she was very welcoming during my first trip to Vietnam. I remember one time I told her, "Oh, I want some coconut juice," and she literally just got me on her, it wasn't even a motorcycle, it was like a little scooter, and she brought like 7 or 8 coconuts for us and like carried them home with me on the back seat. And of course I was a little kid back then, so I'm sure there are kids who know how to use a cleaver to cut open a coconut, but I still don't. But she cut open the coconuts for me. But she's not just a coconut aunt, you know. I saw how she talked with my dad and my other aunts and uncles. She's more calm and peaceful. I believe she was Buddhist and a vegetarian. So I was very surprised to hear of her illness because it was debilitating and chronic. It was not a good prognosis. I was thinking, how does that even happen? Another positive memory I have with her was that she tends to do a Tai Chi or some other Asian exercises in the morning. But one of those exercises, you get to use this giant wooden sword. It's like a fake sword. It's not like a real weapon or anything. But it's like you hold it and you swing it around and whatnot. And I really liked the sword. And she just gave it to me. Unfortunately, I think I lost the sword. And it was a pain in the butt to take back to America. I'm very sure my dad was not happy about it. But it just goes with so much generosity, such a kind heart, kind spirit. I know some of the pivots may be a bit abrupt, but I'll talk about another aunt in Canada. I know I met her at least once. There may have been a second time, but I don't fully remember. But she was the oldest sibling on my dad's side, so she served as a quote-unquote pioneer with education, with international travel. She served as an example, for the rest of my aunts and uncles and my dad. At the time, I liked journaling and blogging, but of course, with the limits of technology at the time, I couldn't go on my Zanga. Yeah, that's another episode if you follow the series. But she liked that I just transcribe like notes of what I did that day on scratch pieces of paper and put it in a folder or write it in a notebook that I would fully transcribe onto the computer when I get back home and post it. She told me not to lose sight of that. It was good to, I guess, be introspective and reflective, especially when you do something kind of different, because I was writing about my trip to Canada. And like I said in the Zanga episode, I had the foresight to copy and paste all my posts before they shut down the entire website. So I still have that post, but I was encouraged by that aunt. Unfortunately, she could not make my wedding, but I did FaceTime her briefly, and I got a pleasant letter from her giving me her best wishes. Unfortunately, I was in that area of Canada a bit more recently and wanted to visit her, but at that time she was pretty sick, and I was discouraged from doing so because I was told that she did not want to entertain guests at the time. But I kind of understood. I didn't know how bad the condition was, but I understand how you wouldn't want some people to see you in a certain state. Yeah, so that FaceTime call and letter was like my last interaction with her. There's no way to transition between people without making it a little awkward. Well, anyways, next up is my uncle. I knew him mainly based on the context of the times that he lived with my parents, and also just from stories I heard about him. The general consensus about him was that he was pretty chill. He did not really have a specific home to stay at. However, he tended to rotate between my parents and my aunts and uncles' houses at different parts of the world. So he would stay with us for maybe 3 or 4 months, and back overseas for a few months, then back to another aunt for a few months, and just repeat the cycle for several years. But when he stayed with us, he lived a pretty chill, peaceful life and routine. He meditated, he walked in the backyard, he walked in the neighborhood. Sometimes he would take the bus and go to various places. He also liked cooking for us, though I admit the way he cooks is probably similar to how I cook. It's literally just throwing a bunch of stuff together. But it was very convenient and very thoughtful and generous, because sometimes the family's a little tired to cook. And of course we have our dishes, but we would take in one of his dishes. One dish I remember that he made often it's literally just tofu and tomatoes. It's very simple, but it's really good. I tried making it myself and it just is not the same. And he's asking you how you're doing, but he also understood that try to keep boundaries too. Like there's some family time, family dinners, and he just eats first or he eats later afterward. Well, one eccentric thing was that sometimes he just wanted a bonding experience. And of course I was in grad school at the time. So the times when I was at home in between breaks, of course I had the car, and he does not have his own car. Sometimes he gets rides with friends or he takes the bus, but he just likes going out to eat, like a fast casual Asian restaurant, or he wants me to take him to the supermarket, or even on weekends to the farmer's market. That's the thing about the relationships with these people. It's a bonding experience, or certain memories you had, whether it's something small or minuscule or insignificant, or well, not really that, but it may not seem like a big deal at the time, but it's what you hold on to when the current situation anyway. As a whole, he was pretty healthy. Due to a medical incident when he was younger, he kind of walked with a limp. And I remember that he was blind in one eye, but he was surprisingly strong. I remember that he beat me in arm wrestling. And you just see this chill guy living with you, but you hear pretty interesting stories about him, how he was quite the ladies' man back in the day. And one time while everyone was on the boat, pirates tried to get onto the boat, and he tried to scare them off, but in the process, he fell off the boat and into the water. So they had to hoist him back up. It just hit home because with him, his end was very abrupt, very sudden. As a matter of fact, my parents were in Vietnam visiting him and other family members at the time, and it happened right after they left. It was very unexpected, out of the blue. Like, here was someone who was relatively healthy and enjoyed life, and that happened to them. And that's another thing. When looking back, whatever petty squabbles or disagreements, they don't seem as important anymore. Well, it wasn't really with me, but it was with my brother. Yeah, my brother had some kind of, I think it was potatoes or some kind of ingredients for a school project, but my uncle took those ingredients and cooked with it, so my brother didn't have those ingredients for that morning, and he was upset with my uncle. But looking back, it's like a interesting memory or anecdote, if anything. And another pivot. I have a second cousin who visited us several times during the summer. Yeah, he was younger than my brother and me. But he was like happy, he was talkative, he was inquisitive. Of course, given the fact that we were all around kids at the time. And I forgot, maybe 3-4 years on him. But he went along wherever we went, whether it be to, I don't know, miniature golf or the mall or just hang out at home. And you know, back in the day, it was a lot of Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And we really enjoyed his company because his environment where he spends the rest of the year, it was not ideal, to say the least. I don't know how serious the talks were. Not that we were going to adopt him, but maybe he could have like lived with us for a bit with the better schools or a better educational track with the proximity to community college and whatnot. But in the end, we didn't want him to be too far from his family. And I knew him mainly during his childhood, and I met him once when he was a teen. He grew up like nice and kind and friendly. Of course, with the educational track, it wasn't as straightforward as it was for me, but he did try his best. And of course, his life wasn't perfect, but he did get his life back on track. But unfortunately, he's gone. Yeah, this one hit different because he was younger than me, and I knew him during my childhood. Not really like a little brother, but just someone to like come along and hang out with, you know, like tag along and do the activities that we did. Let's just say that I blame a certain rich family in a certain industry for his death, because his sister died the same way also. But it hit different because, you know, with youth, it's like there's promise and possibilities and potential. And the thing about death, it's final, you know, like that person, they will never have other milestones, they will never have other memories. All that's left is like their impact of the world, their past relationships, and the impression and memories you had with that person. I think I was in grad school at the time I found out the news. I was in disbelief. I was like, not him, not this early, you know. Last but not least, at the time of this episode, the most prominent personal loss is my babysitter. Of course, she was literally my babysitter until I was about, I'm guessing, 9 or 10 years old. But she wasn't just my babysitter. She was the one for my brother and my cousins too, who lived nearby. And also she helped out my parents a lot, because nowadays we know how much childcare and daycare and babysitters cost. She was a bit on the older side, but she kept it traditional and cultural. Of course, her English was not the best, but she made up for it by Vietnamese. She spoke that only with us, and she took us to the park. She picked us up from school. She cooked really good food. But it's just like the kindness, like someone holding down the fort, you know. Of course, my parents had to work, so having someone dependable like her, it was a godsend. Of course, I visited her several times after, I think a couple of times in, of course, middle school, high school, undergrad, before grad school, after grad school, and unfortunately one more time when she was in the, I'm not sure if it was assisted living or convalescent home. I'll be honest, because of her, it might be one of the reasons why my grasp of the Vietnamese language is where it is right now, because just speaking Vietnamese, like conversational, is basic vocabulary and terms and concepts and grammar. You just need someone to talk like that with you. If anything, it's just the exposure, the interaction. And I'm sure she helped babysit her own grandchildren after my brother and I and cousins got older. But babysitting and childcare, it's something you don't take for granted nowadays, because good help, it is hard to come by and it's expensive. But because someone of good quality, someone who cares, someone who can at least impart some other values rather than just have your presence there and not let anything happen to the kids and just feed them, that's it. She provided much more than that. But enough about me. Once again, I will pivot to those of friends and families who had their losses. I won't go into too many details, but I had friends who have lost at least one of their parents. I had a couple of friends who recently lost one of their child, a friend who lost their sibling through an accident. And unfortunately, sometimes these losses happen when you are in a constricted or vulnerable part of your life, where you have to address the loss, but also keep up with things on a professional or work basis or school or academic basis too. Like after it happens, you gotta go back to work, go back to school, go back to your daily life. It's not easy, and you don't know how long it takes. To me, those are the heavier losses. Unfortunately, I have not experienced any of those losses yet, but death and loss, it's a part of life. If I don't experience it now, I'll experience it later. Like people close to you will die. Unfortunately, it hits a bit older for the elderly, because a lot of their friends and peers are around their age. I remember my grandma, she said within about a 2-year period, 10 of her friends like passed away. And I live in a 55, no, not in one, of course not. I live near a 55 and older community, and you kind of feel a certain way when you see a for sale sign on the home, because it means like something happened, you know. Not to mention whenever the ambulance comes to those homes. And this is just talking about people that we see with several degrees of separation, or people in our personal life. When we take into account certain public figures or celebrities, whether it be a singer or an actor or actress, with their passing, you reflect upon the legacy they left behind, even though you don't personally know them. But then you also acknowledge their humanity, you know. You don't 100% put them on a pedestal, but you don't disrespect their name when they're gone either. You know that behind it, it was still a person with flaws and struggles and challenges. But another thing is, you can't mourn forever. You take the positive impacts of that person's legacy, and if it's a person you know them personally, you take the memories and anecdotes with them, and you make it a part of your identity, and you live your best life. And if we're closer to them, you live it for them inadvertently. When talking about the impact of a human life, right, so far I've talked about the good. I am not going to pivot to a quote-unquote bad, but you must consider what kind of legacy that one leaves behind. Because if it's a legacy of kindness, positivity, professionalism, empathy, generosity, giving, that is much more worthwhile, more memorable. Because the opposite is either one of negativity and drama, or one of seclusion and hedonism and obscurity. Like you were just a hermit who only did your activities and did your own hobbies and rarely interacted with anyone else. That's the choice you made, but unfortunately it's a sad choice. Like, you don't want to be replaceable, you know, because you do matter, but you should matter to someone. But in order to make yourself matter to someone, you have to put yourself out there. Because if you were mean or selfish or standoffish, that would be the legacy you leave behind when you're gone. It takes me to the example of a certain talk radio commentator. He was pretty prominent. Actually, I don't know how long he was prominent for, at least several decades. I believe he died in the mid or late 2010. Personally, I never listened to him, but I heard his name thrown around a lot. But he always seemed angry and negative and complaining and ostracizing this or that person or group. And he was very polarizing, and the people who listened to him, they became polarized and opinionated also. He took them down rabbit holes that were difficult to get out of. Not to mention he was very hypocritical in his personal life. But when he passed, maybe his immediate family were like, oh, he was a great guy, he was a great friend. But the people who were in the sphere of his field, they just immediately replaced him with another talking head with all that negativity and polarization. And the rhetoric that he spread, it was brainwashing, it tore families apart. But that's the legacy he left behind, that he chose to leave behind. I don't miss him. Well, then again, I didn't really follow him or anything. I just heard that name thrown around. But I've seen interviews of him and seen how his radio shows are like. It's like that typical, oh, I'm holier than thou, or I'm better than you, or you talk with a giant stick up your butt, that you're always angry and frustrated, annoyed at something, or a certain marginalized group, or certain ways society shouldn't be. Oh, this, why don't they do that? Blah, 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 blah. That was the premise of his radio show for hours on end, for several days a week, for many weeks, for many years and a decade. That's what he's remembered as. Maybe his family and close friends know him in a different context, and that's just one talk radio commentator. What about historical figures, whether it be positive ones like strong leaders, or negative ones like dictators, or polarizing ones that brought their country out of a tough period but at a huge cost? Of course, those people weren't perfect, but without those people's place in history, like, history would have likely taken a different course. Like, certain programs would not have been implemented, certain social, geopolitical standings or economic movements would have not taken place, and not to mention cultish figures. I won't go too deep or too heavy about this, but once the cultish figure died, one or two things will happen. If the movement was strong enough, then there would be a successor. But if it was fickle and hypocritical, or not that strong or long lasting to begin with, then hopefully his followers quote unquote die with him. Not literally die, but the movement is dead, especially if it was a negative brainwashing movement that infected its parasitical grasp on all aspects of society, especially government. I'll go a little bit more in depth with one animated movie I saw when I was younger. It was called Our Friend Martin, about Martin Luther King, and this will likely be the only historical figure I talk about. Yeah, so these kids, they learn about the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, and they go to his like old house and they find a watch, and it kind of time travels him back to see what life was like back in his day. And then one kid, he wants to bring Martin to the future to show the positive changes he made. However, those changes, like, they never occurred because Martin was never there to lead the movement. So MLK realized that he had to go back. He had to live his life. He had to do all those things despite the consequences. And the kid that took a Martin into the future, he was like, how can one person have so much of an impact? But that's the thing. You don't have to be super popular or famous, but at least an impact, whether it be your immediate family, your community, your close friend circle. You don't want to be, oh, that person lived, then they died. Or, oh, that person just had that one quirk or only did that one hobby. You want to have a better legacy, like a better something that is longer lasting, so there's some appreciation and respect, whether it be some kind of values or memories that you left behind. I'm not saying that everyone will be like that or should be like that, but it would not hurt to at least strive to be like that. If you have the means, the position, if you're higher up on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's like your duty at that point to spread upon your experience, your teachings, your life lesson, your example, your value, your knowledge, your personality, maybe have some memories. And nowadays with videos and pictures, it's a lot easier than just word of mouth or reading something through a book. Because I'll be honest, I have seen lumps. You don't want to be a lump because no one remembers lumps. You don't have to be perfect, but at least somewhat worthwhile, somewhat impactful. Because if you mattered, then those around you, or maybe even the world, deserves to know, even if it's for like a little bit moment in time. Well, my talking capacity for this topic has reduced for the time being. I know it was another heavier topic, but once again, I appreciate your patience. And I believe the next episode, it will likely be a lighter, more fun topic. Once again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.